Hello everyone, and welcome to our second webinar in the 2019 Summer Learning Series. My name is Piers Weigers, and I am the coordinator of JobRight's training program. However, before we get started with today's session, just wanted to run over a few items. During the loop, you might have seen this slide a few times. If possible, please just mute yourself during the session so that we can cut down on any sort of background noise or feedback that might be picked up. Now, we will host a question and answer period at the end of the session. And at that point, we'll ask you to just use the chat feature and just briefly type in the letter Q or the word question, and then we'll call on you systematically. And then again, just a reminder to unmute yourself when we do call on you so that you can share your question with the group. So today's webinar is titled Enhancing Participation in Research, and we are very excited to welcome our two facilitators. First, we have Lach, Associate Professor in the School of Social Work at McGill, and Donna Thomson, author, caregiver, and co-instructor of the Family Engagement in Research Certificate Program that is co-sponsored out of McGill University with the support of Kids Brain Health Network. Together, Lucy and Donna are a part of JobRight team working on the Strongest Families Neurodevelopmental Program, which explores whether a targeted parenting support program can improve the emotional and behavioral regulation in children with diverse neurodisabilities. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to hand the virtual podium over to Lucy, and we can get started.
So, okay, thanks so much, Pierre.
Let me share, switch the screen sharing over to you.
Okay, I'll just wait for that. Pressing a button and nothing was moving.
Yeah, it's not helping. There we go. All right, it should be on your end.
Great, yes. How's that?
That's perfect.
Perfect. And how do I advance the slides now?
Just with your keypad.
Oh yes, I see it here.
There you go.
All right. Well, thank you very much for inviting Donna and I to give this presentation on participation in research. I just wanted to say a few more words about Donna and I. Donna and I met a number of years ago through the very kind of tight and relatively extensive network we have in Canada of researchers who are occupying the space of doing work in the field of children with brain-based developmental disorders. And Donna was engaging at that time as a parent of a young man who has cerebral palsy, and I'm sure Donna will tell you a little bit more about that. And our relationship has grown over the years, and I'm very fortunate to be able to work with Donna on a particular project within JobRight, which has to do with evaluating a program that I'll be describing to you in a few minutes for children. For parents of children and where the kids have a brain-based developmental disorder and problematic behavior or dysregulated behavior. So Donna, I just, before I go on to describe the program, perhaps you could say a few words about yourself.
Yeah, it would be my pleasure. Thank you so much, Lucy. And it's a real pleasure to be here talking about our Strongest Families project, and also enhancing parent and patient engagement in research and participation in research. It's something that Lucy and I talk about an awful lot, and I think about a great deal. I think that we're going to explore some themes today that relate to authentic engagement, barriers and facilitators to making engagement and participation possible for families of children who have neurodevelopmental disabilities and often who have many competing priorities at home. So our son is 30 now, and he has severe cerebral palsy and is medically complex. And we looked after him at home for 23 years with lots of involvement with the healthcare system and some involvement with the research community as well. Nicholas was one of the first individuals in our family, was one of the first individuals to be studied by CanChild. So we have a rather long history, and I'm still very passionate about how families can influence the way research is done, what is researched, and how it's managed, and also how research can be directed through advocacy efforts to accelerate change in the healthcare system for the good of children with disabilities and their families. So Lucy?
All righty, let me just go back to the slides here. Before we get into the content of the presentation, I just want to describe a bit to you the Strongest Families, or Parents, it's also called Parents Empowering Neurodiverse Kids project. It's a randomized control trial, because the reason I'm describing it here is we're actually going to be referring to it as throughout our presentation, because our experience of trying to enhance participation through our partnership and through partnership with parents is going to be is really what we have worked on making happen in this project. So the Parents Empowering Neurodiverse Kids is what we call a three-armed randomized control trial. So parents are randomized to one of three conditions. In the first condition, or the first arm, they have only access to information on how to access respite and funding for their child. We've created some pathways for step-by-step procedures in each province, and are constantly updating that information, and so parents are given access to that information. The second group in the randomized control trial gets access to that, plus a parent-to-parent group on Facebook. It's a closed group. Plus parents get access to about 12 online modules of specific skills that they practice and that are demonstrated, and they practice. These modules have some are online, so it doesn't matter where parents are in the country. They can do it from home at hours that make sense to them, when they're able to focus and they're not attending to other things. And then the third arm gets access to all of that, the pathways to respite and funding, the Facebook parent-to-parent connection, the online modules, and they get access to group coaching, which is provided once every week or two, depending on when the group can get together. So if we could go to so the next slide is a simple slide. It's speaking to the relationship between participation and research, and the importance of partnership. So we're not talking today about partnership, parent advisory partners on research projects, but parent participants in research projects as partners in the research. And this really represents, I think, a significant paradigm shift, where in the past, research participants were people that us researchers would look for, recruit, get them to sign off on a consent form, give them some measures to complete. There may or may not be an intervention or a drug trial, or we just may be seeking some information about them, and off they would go. Viewing and treating parents as partners in the research requires a concerted effort and a real shift in thinking about who they are to the researcher. So as Donna and I were preparing for this presentation, Donna, we talked about this as really being a triad, a triadic relationship between the researcher, the research participants, and the study itself, really requiring a greater mutual understanding, a trust and respect for one another. And it's not something that happens overnight. I keep learning from parents about what is needed and what I need to be doing differently as a researcher every time I am involved in another project. Yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
I was just going to jump in because Lucy, you made me think of at the Child Bright conference, someone inadvertently used the word subject to refer to research participants, and there was kind of a collective sigh in the room. And you know, I think we sometimes use that language, which is almost archaic today because the whole movement to parent engagement, patient engagement and research has accelerated so much in the last few years, and language has evolved along with it. But the idea of a research subject is very different from a research partner participant.
Right. I would agree. It's and I think parents are increasingly calling on researchers to understand their experience and to respect their experience of being participants in a study, and to alter the language that's used. I was recently at a meeting, and there was somebody, a researcher that was presenting on some research pertaining to the prenatal environment in the uterus, and he referred to that environment as being, in situations where women are prone to not be able to conceive, or to not be able to, the uterine environment is in some ways, how should I say it? Even I'm struggling for the language. It's problematic in the sense that children.
I think did he call it a hostile environment?
They called it a hostile environment.
Yeah.
And and I thought, somebody needs to speak to this fellow to say, referring to a woman's uterus, a woman who's not able to carry a child to term as a hostile environment is problematic. We need to find better language for these sorts of things. But I'm sure, this is the sort of language that's used in this researcher's environment, in the, perhaps in the literature itself. And calling out researchers on the use of such terminology is needed.
Mm-hmm.
So next slide here really refers to what I hope we hope the participants will get out of today's discussion. I think it's going to be more of a discussion between Donna and I than a presentation per se. Is that you will understand that the process of participation in research is actually about building a partnership and gaining a mutual understanding of the other's experience. So how parents experience what I'm doing, and being open to that experience and calling out what I'm doing, or at least bringing my attention, because sometimes these are inadvertent things that assumptions that I'm making that I'm not even aware of. And appreciating the dynamic and reciprocal nature of this relationship, being open to learning about terminology that we use and practices that we've been implementing and as researchers for years and years without really thinking about what the implications are for parents. And I'll be giving you some examples from our own Strongest Families experience to date, and the kinds of things that we've learned about what we need to do differently. And to shift the approach to research through understanding how these respective frameworks, as well as the framework of the study itself, interact with one another. All right, so Donna, we're going to start with Donna, and Donna, I'm going to invite you to reflect to the audience about, as a parent, what motivates you to become involved in research? Why would you become involved in research? Why wouldn't you just, when your son was younger, or even now, when he was younger, what would have motivated you, and what do you understand from other parents about what motivates them to become involved in research?
Well, I think there is, a myriad of motivations that parents have to become involved in research, but I think there are some common ones. One is certainly the motivation to find out more about one's child's challenges, the nature of the disability, the cause of the disability, try out particular treatments for functional improvements and so forth. So there are kind of personal motivations with respect to one's own child and family well-being that could result. But I think that also leads to a feeling in parents of that I'm being a good parent. I'm doing everything I can to help my child, including uncover every possible strategy to help my child achieve their potential. So partly, I hear that a lot from families, that I feel like I'm being a good parent by participating, but I also hear that I'm being a good member of society and I'm helping others by participating as well. So there's also the fact that I think very personally, when people sort of do a little bit of a deeper dive into their motivations about participating, often families will say, it's a really lonely journey and my child may have a rare condition. I get an appointment every 6 months or every year with our specialists. My child may or may not be seen very regularly for therapy, but the fact is I'm not in conversation very often with people who are experts in my child's condition. And I don't have that many people interested in our life. And when someone shines a light and really wants to know about the lived experience of your child and how it's affecting your family and all of the implications around hope for the future and that, I think that it's an opportunity to experience a sense of validation and worth of your child's lived experience and of your child's life. So I would say that those are some common themes.
Donna, are there, just want you to comment a little bit more on parents participating or consenting for their child to participate in research where they hope that the child will benefit from the research itself. Like it might be a study of, genetics, or it might be an intervention study or a psychosocial study. Does that come into play as well?
Absolutely. And right or wrong, as a person who is very much in the advocacy space in the disability family community in Canada, I often say to parents who are very frustrated by the lack of opportunity to engage with any healthcare professionals and the sort of lack of services generally, that research may be one way to access a treatment or a treatment trial or it could be a strategy to get the attention, generally speaking, of a group of people who may have the power to uncover certain truths about your child, which will ease the burden of their disability and ease the path into the future for the child and family. So I think particularly in this climate of austerity, research is seen by lots of people, lots of families, as one way to not access services so much as offer the glimmer of hope of improvement. It's as simple as that.
Interesting that you say that, because on most of these, when we speak about things like randomized control trials, like with our strongest families, there's this element of 50% chance that you're going to go into this group where you're going to get it. The Cadillac version of the treatment well, in our case, it's split 33, 33, 33, but you know, there's a chance that you'll be randomized into a group where you get the placebo, or where you get nothing. And even, what's that experience like for families?
Well, you know, it's a drag. I mean, obviously. But, you know, if you have nothing, a lottery ticket is way better than nothing. You know, even if you lose, you'll buy another one. You know, the next trial, you might get randomized into another group. And in our, you know, in our study that we're involved with, that we're talking about today, Strongest Families, you know, even if you're randomized to that third arm, you are given access to information that is very hard for families to find.
Good point.
And,
So that's a really
yeah.
good point. We struggled with that, didn't we? And as a
Yeah.
group, we didn't feel that families who are so vulnerable, who are so desperately seeking some services, and this is an area where, you know, developmental pediatrics and pediatric psychiatry aren't always comfortable with dealing with kids with mental health issues, and the mental health system is not comfortable in dealing with kids with developmental issues. And so, you know, this program is actually addressing a gap in services. We don't know if it's going to work. We're testing to see if it's going to work. And it's to have parents who have challenging kids, who are seeking services, to be randomized to nothing did not feel okay to us. We felt that at least, at a minimum, providing them with information was better than nothing at all. So there are ethical dilemmas around randomization to nothing, or to the placebo.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I recall that at the end of this study, everyone will have access to the online curriculum.
Yes, they will. That's right.
Yeah.
That's so that once they're finished, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
All right, maybe you would like to speak to what some of the barriers are to participation for parents.
Yeah, you know, as much as I just said that people are seeking to have a light shone on their child and their family experience with disability, there's a lot of ambivalence about that, and particularly in, you know, let's talk about this study for a minute, because this study looks at parenting under the most difficult circumstances, where you do have the combination of a developmental disability and, you know, dysregulated behavior. So parents are highly stressed, and we know that, because there's lots of evidence that we looked at in our research team, you know, that shows that parents feel very inadequate in parenting under such challenging circumstances. I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, it's really, really hard. And so I think to enter a program like this one, there is, of course, a fear of being judged publicly, as if, you know, one isn't judging oneself as a parent harshly enough, but to expose yourself to a standard of parenting, a standard of good parenting. That's really, I think, takes a great deal of courage on the part of families. And also, it's probably motivated, if they say yes, by a certain amount of desperation too. So, you know, in terms of, I think everything that we've tried to do, and Karen Turner, the project manager, has tried so hard to do, is to nurture families and be kind in absolutely all the written materials, in the facilitation of the Facebook groups. My goodness, kindness is a really, really big factor built in to all of the materials and the strategies in this. And I think the PFAC has been helpful in tweaking language and helping adjust the lens to make sure that parents aren't hurt, by inadvertently, by language or by some of the visual images or anything in the study.
Yeah, maybe this is a good time to bring up. When we opened up recruitment to the study, we have a series of questions that parents need to answer in order to ascertain or determine whether they're eligible. Yeah. Which is standard research practice. You got to meet certain criteria in order to enter into a study, and if you're above or below a particular threshold, that's the nature of research. But parents don't necessarily understand that. And Donna, maybe you could take it from here as to how some parents experienced not being included in a study.
Yeah, there was, parents who have never stepped up and applied to be a participant in a research study before, as Lucy said, don't understand the parameters and don't understand how it works. And so I think at first we had a list of questionnaires that had an introduction that explained there were certain elements of this questionnaire that might exclude you from the study. But certainly there was, at the first recruitment push, we, of course, all the parents on the Patient Family Advisory Committee were using their own personal social media networks to say, hey, guess what? Here's a new study. Come on and join this study. And we got lots of applications, and quite a number were rejected due to the eligibility criteria, and they received a message that they were not eligible for this study. And then the messages on Facebook started to appear saying, guess I'm not worthy, and oh crap, my kid isn't good enough. And there were just a lot of hurt feelings. And people took it personally.
Really, really, really taken. Like when you told us that, we were like, oh my gosh, that is not our intent. What can we do? Oh. We couldn't change inclusion criteria, but what could we do to to make parents feel less judged, less rejected? I think that was part of what you explained to us, is that when you're desperately seeking something for your child and you think you finally found something that they may benefit from, and you apply, and another rejection on top of, I'm sure, a gazillion other rejections that parents have experienced, that we were contributing to something that we did not want to contribute to.
Yeah. And it was interesting because so we went back, and I know that lots of members of the PFAC chimed in on rewriting the introduction to make it a really soft landing and help them understand the criteria and so forth. But also, I think the fact that we did that, and that then members of the PFAC went back to the parent community and said, oh, everybody felt so bad, and we've rewritten the introduction, and hopefully this won't happen again. And there was a really, really good reaction to the fact that people acted immediately, and that people felt badly that feelings, had been hurt. And that message was delivered back to the parent community, and everybody, of course, says, oh, it's okay, tell them not to worry. How it is, like if you explain and apologize, whatever. Yeah.
So just for the audience, so PFAC is our Parent Family Advisory. Parent Family Advisory, Mike, if I got that right,
yes.
We're the Parent Family Advisory Committee. So in the Strongest Families, in this project, we've been working with a group of very involved, very engaged parents in not only in adapting the intervention, but in thinking about the design of the research and the selection of the outcome measures, and more recently in the recruitment process. So our parents have been involved in every step of the way. But that's not what this presentation is about. But I just wanted to say that they've been a fantastic group to work with. Yeah, I guess, you know, Donna, when you and I were speaking about this presentation, you made a comment, and I took a note of it, that making a decision to participate in research is not a business decision. It's a very emotional decision, and that really stuck with me. Wondering if you can speak to that a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that making a decision to participate in research involves hope, desperation, and it also involves this idea of opening yourself up to being examined and exposed, and taking a huge risk about what that may mean to your sense of hope and desperation.
Right.
About your child and your child's future. So I think it is very emotional, and I think that it's important to design very carefully with parents, in the case of childhood disability research, language that is going to help people understand the research process and parameters and you know, sort of necessary measures, but also the idea of soft landings and encouragement, because it is so emotional, and the journey that most families walk with a child with disability is really hard when you think about all of the barriers that they encounter every day in the education system, at the local park, with friends and neighbors. It's particularly children, in the case of this research project, who exhibit, you know, I know we don't like to say challenging behavior, but I'll say challenging behavior. You know, it's just really hard to live in the world easily with these conditions with your child, where you're constantly having to broker the relationship between your child and the world. So it's very risky, I think, for parents to say, yes, I will do this. And so then they need to be supported.
Right, right. Well, so I guess what we wanted to do is do a bit of a frick and frack. So now that we've heard a bit from Donna about what a potential minefield in you know, participation in research can be for parents, and I've come to understand that more and more over time. I'm sure that I started my career not really appreciating that at all. I wanted to give a perspective from a researcher myself about what motivates me to become involved in research. So one of the things that motivates me is to make what is invisible visible to others. You know, some of the work that I have become involved in has had to do with things like counting, you know, establishing prevalence of children with brain-based developmental disorders in Canada. You know, and as I go around and give presentations and say to people, you know, 1 in every 11 to 12 children in Canada has a brain-based developmental disorder based on the data that we have analyzed. People are in awe of that. They are, what was previously not so clear to them because of because of the way in which we have not counted in the past, it becomes more obvious to them that understanding the prevalence has some implications for now how we think about budgets for education, how we think about budgets for delivering services, how this can be used for the purpose of advocacy. That's what makes me happy, that I can generate some kind of information that others can then pick up and run with. Another reason why I have become involved in research has to do with, you know, tackling the inconsistencies between patterns that are observed in practice in the real world as a social worker, and what the literature is saying or documenting. An example of that I can provide is when I was a social worker at Sick Kids in Toronto many years ago. I was meeting with children who were having brain surgery for their seizures, and we were seeing the kids after epilepsy surgery and the kids were parents were disappointed, the kids were continuing to have difficulties. There had been expectations around improvement, not only in the seizures, but in the child's behavior and cognitive abilities, etc. And so when we went to the literature to read what it said, of course, there were several studies, but they were not that well designed, and there were claims of improvement, that kids would indeed improve in all these sort of domains of quality of life. So there was an inconsistency between what we were seeing clinically and what was being documented. So that motivated us to apply, along with several others at Sick Kids, to apply for funding, to obtain a grant, to do this study. And that's what researchers do, right? They're in many ways, that's how our merit is evaluated. How many grants do we get? How big are those grants? How many papers do we write from those grants? And more recently, there's been a shift in emphasis, not only from, publications in top journals, although that's still really important. There's an additional piece that's been added, which is, what's the catalytic value of the research? What difference has it made to practice? How have people taken up your findings and changed policy or practice? And this is, there's a whole new area of so-called implementation science that's evolved around how to make that happen, how to ensure that that findings don't just sit in a journal article somewhere, that they're taken up by the people that need to know about these things. So it's addressing gaps in knowledge, understanding certain phenomena. Like I guess I'm thinking back to what Donna was saying about being asked questions that can be quite invasive. Like, I was working with a parent advisory group, and I said, we were about to launch a large clinical study, and I said, there really is very little about, we know very little about what the income situation is of families of kids with disabilities. And until we understand better what whether the extent to which they're living in poverty, the extent to which they're able to build assets and how those compare to the liabilities, we're really not able to easily tell a story about the extent to which the income supports that we're providing to families are making a difference. And so the parents that were working with me, and as we were designing the survey, because they had reacted to the questions that I had drafted around income. Well, Lucy, why do you need to know this? Parents are really going to bristle at having to provide such very personal information. And they were right. And so how are we going to do this? How are we going to gather this information to be able to tell a story about what the income situation is of families without and not be able to gather it? So where we landed in the end is we decided to, before asking the questions, to explain why we were asking these questions. And it was the same around, issues of separation and divorce. There are claims around high prevalence rates, 8 times or 10 times the likelihood of getting separated or divorced. So there were questions in this particular survey on the quality of the couple relationship and on marital status. Well, Lucy, why? Again, I was called to task. Lucy, why are you asking these questions? And again, I'm questioning some taken for granted assumptions that we have about rates of exorbitantly high rates of separation and divorce. Maybe they're true, maybe they're not, but this is an opportunity for us to better understand this. And so we built in, again, a rationale for why we were asking these questions. So I guess, as far as the research, from a researcher's perspective, it's important to knowledge development, challenging taken for granted assumptions is important. Evaluating approaches, interventions, practices to make sure that what we're touting as being evidence-based is based on the best kind of science that we have available to us. That's what motivates us. And then, REBs, the research ethics boards, will help us to determine whether we're doing that in as ethical a manner as possible, and whether parents are consenting or children are consenting or assenting, and whether we're providing information and not hiding anything from parents when they do agree to participate in studies. And I must tell you, as somebody who does research and does recruitment and has done in different sites across Canada, the kind of rigor that is required of us and is by research ethics boards is quite high. And their different ethics boards may ask for different wording. Mind you, there's no standardized way of doing it, which is a bit of a pain, but we are accountable to these research, to our peers, for ensuring that, and we are reviewed by our peers to make sure that the research that we're doing is ethical and is done in an ethical manner. So I guess the other experience that I wanted to share with you as a researcher has to do with, so let's suppose I get the grant and I've got the research ethics approval, and now I've got to find my participants. And this is where, speaking to Donna and other parents about how to do that in a manner that is as transparent and respectful as possible. Because I'm, my success as a researcher and my accountability as a researcher has to do with ensuring that I recruit an adequate sample of parents who, and that I can say, and I can arrive at some conclusions with some confidence that this is not a function of, these findings are not a function of bias. There's always some kind of bias, but minimizing bias, and that I can, with some confidence, then go to service providers to say, here's a best practice approach, or here's what we think we know about this particular issue. And then finally, what successful research looks like is making sure that the findings, if once those are generated, that they get to the right people, and that the right people are interested in those findings. And one of the ways of doing that is actually engaging those people at the front end when we're designing and even the questions. So increasingly, researchers are including those who need to take up the findings at the beginning of the study, so that they're there at the finish line, ready to hand over and potentially change their ways of thinking or their practice patterns. Any thoughts, any questions, Donna, about that piece?
No, I was just reflecting on the patient parent perspective on including that group at the front end, developing the research question, developing the research design as we did with Strongest Families. And I remember saying to you, oh my gosh, I don't know a single thing about research design. This is going to be an embarrassing and useless conversation. And then we all met in Montreal, and we sure did have lots to say about the research design. And it was great. But also the way in which participants can use the results of this study as advocacy tools, just as much as policymakers and clinicians can. People can walk away with the research paper at the end of the study and wave it in front of a school administrator or a clinician and say, look at this. This is new research that shows best practice, and I would like to partner with you to enact it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's, I mean, that is absolutely the best experience possible.
Mm-hmm.
All right, then going to the next slide, I guess we've talked about some of this, but we're going to reiterate about, kind of summarize what constitutes a successful experience in research participation for parents. Donna, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I think we really have gone over this, you know, meaningful engagement, authentic engagement, as opposed to here's something we want you to read and give us your feedback on. It's already all done. Oh, you like it? Okay, yes. Thank you. You know, that would not be meaningful engagement. I think where we have demonstrated a real interest, ongoing support for research participants, a respect for their other competing priorities in life, some kind of strategy to support research participants when their child may be in crisis halfway through the project. I think that's also something that we could be doing a lot better. And just, you know, I love this word reassurance, because it is, that really speaks to what we were talking about before, an explanation of what we're doing, why we're doing it, why it's important, how it's going to affect change for children like mine, depending on what we find in this study, and the availability of someone to talk to if there are questions or concerns. And that means email and telephone. And most research projects now also have Facebook groups. So providing a range of options of how to get in touch with a person if there are questions or concerns.
Donna, what do you, I mean, one of the frustrations of researchers has to do with parents dropping out and not completing what the measures, or not completing the study itself. If there were, you know, several points of measurement, what can you provide researchers who are here with us some insights into what that might be about?
Well, I think one of the things that it's about is just the length of the questionnaires that people are expected to do, and I think that this is something we talked about a lot on our team, Lucy, when we looked at some of the measures and we said, "Whoa, this is too burdensome for families. How are we going to make this a reasonable ask?" And also where sometimes it's about not giving everything at once to families with a tight deadline. If it's reasonable and doable for a busy parent who has all these extra challenges, and I think, you know, the people who are talking to research participants, whether that's someone who's hired to facilitate an online peer group of participants, or it's the study coordinator, those people need to, you know, be checking in regularly with participants to make sure that they are supported in completing the study. Sometimes
I'm asking the question, sorry to interrupt you, but what can I do to make it easier for you, right? What can I, is there something that you know, sometimes parents just can't block off the time to complete what they need to complete. You know, will a prompt help? Will a phone call help? Or not? I mean, I guess the other piece to this that I've learned is life just sometimes gets in the way, right?
Yes. Some people will start a new job on top of everything. Sometimes people will have a serious medical crisis with their child. There are circumstances that prevent people from completing a research project for sure sometimes. But, you know, I'm talking about the other group that just says, whoa, this has suddenly become not fun, and I'm losing belief in this project, and that my voice matters in it, and it's extra effort. Is it worth it? And people are constantly weighing, is it worth this? Me taking the time from stuff I really should be doing right now. So I think a big part of this is for people on the research team and who are looking at the measures, to be able to imagine the participant's life. And I have participated in research projects where I knew that there was a massive disconnect between my reality and the reality that people on the project thought I had. Like, they just had no clue what my life was like. And I think that you know, patient family advisory committees can really help in that regard, to say, okay, so you are wanting my child to come into the hospital to be interviewed, and my child has PTSD as soon as we hit the parking lot. That is never going to happen. You know, you need people to help give you that kind of advice before you're in the design stage.
So interesting. Very, very insightful. Thank you for that. I'm aware of the time. You know, I said to Pierre at the beginning, I don't think we're going to have more than 35 minutes worth of through our presentation yet. So I'm going to, let's see. I think, you know, the pieces that, you know, constitute a successful experience, again, are, you know, similar but different for researchers. You know, recruiting the right participants, making sure that participants complete the measures. These are the kinds of pressures that we experience. You know, that having results that show positive gains, and, you know, catalyzing new ideas, delivering the findings for participants. This is what constitutes a successful experience for us. I think I'm going to skip these two slides, and just maybe we can conclude by, and I think we've really talked about this already, but the importance of parents and researchers, parent participants and researchers working together and making course corrections along the way to improve participants' experience of the study. So on that note, I just wanted to thank the parent participants in our Strongest Families Neurodevelopmental Project, who continue to challenge me and teach me in ways that I never imagined. Thank you for that. I guess we can open up the floor to some reflections, comments, questions before we sign off.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lucy and Donna. So yes, just a reminder to everyone on the line, if you have any questions that you would like to direct to my wonderful presenters today, just indicate in the chat box with a Q or the word question, and then we'll call on you to unmute yourself and go from there. So I guess as folks arrange their thoughts, maybe I can get started with a question to you all. So when it comes to the Strongest Families project, have you had any challenges in, say, recruiting typically underrepresented groups? And if so, how has the perspective provided by your Patient and Family Advisory Council helped overcome this limitation?
Right. I guess we've reflected on this at our conference last December, and you know, we've started our recruitment, and our recruitment has been kind of a soft launch, if you will, mostly through social media. And so one can make assumptions about, you know, who's on social media and who's not, but I don't know what the socioeconomic status is of parents who are using social media, or what the ethnocultural status is of parents using social media. As we move forward and, you know, get a better sense of who's being recruited, we will be reaching out to community groups and continuing in our efforts. But to say that we're going to be specifically targeting, a particular group, a particular group from a particular socioeconomic status, that's challenging. It really is, I must say, one of the most, we all worry about that and think about that. But to go out and target is not on either. So I don't know. I'm being very wishy-washy in my response, but as a researcher, I feel a little bit helpless in that regard, I must say.
Oh, no, I would agree. It's definitely a challenging topic to try and address appropriately. Sorry, Donna, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that we do feel like I feel personally on this Patient Family Advisory Committee that we're all in a bit of a privileged position, and we're all working our own networks to promote this project with other privileged people. But we did try really hard to get a geographical and diverse Patient Family Advisory Committee, and then to be able to use ourselves, to act as ambassadors within the family community for the purposes of recruitment. And we do have someone who has close ties to one of the First Nations, and we do have a pretty diverse group of people, but I don't know that we do sort of economically, as Lucy said. It's very difficult, and it is something we worry about, but we're working on it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge because also, when as a researcher, both Pat McGraw and I are, have our feet firmly planted in the university and hospital environments. And we're very much, this is a pan-Canadian study. We're not sitting in an organization in northern Saskatchewan or northern Alberta saying to parents, come and participate in this study. We are at the mercy of this knowledge about this study getting out to the right people, and depending on champions, quite frankly, in across the country to get the information to folks that might potentially benefit from this, or to engage in this at a minimum. So it's an ongoing. I guess it requires ongoing vigilance. Would be my response.
Excellent.
Lucy, we have a question here about your thoughts on working with bereaved parents on projects who are sharing past lived experience.
Right. I think it gets back to what we were saying earlier about the extent to which parents want to share their experience, and a balance with not re-traumatizing parents in inviting them to reflect on their past experience. And that requires interviewers who are informed about trauma and can interview in a manner that is cognizant of the possibility of parents becoming re-triggered while telling their story. And so it is a fine balance, but I think ethics boards need to be assured that, particularly as parents consent to participate in interviews, where they're invited to reflect on their experience, whether it's an experience of bereavement or loss, or even their experience of hope. Things happen in the course of an interview that no one expected. And so having an interviewer who is cognizant of that, aware of that, can stop the interview and together reflect on whether this is doing harm or not, is important.
I just wanted to add one thing too, is we do talk a lot about the fact that many parents of children with disabilities, particularly complex disabilities and chronic illness, are traumatized. We have, we're suffering the effects of trauma, and so we talked about that throughout, and we continue to talk about it, Lucy?
Yes, very, very much so. We're really, the phenomenon of PTSD or complex trauma among parents, they're increasingly, in fact, I think I just saw something this morning from Bloom, an interview with someone from, I believe, York University, about this phenomenon of chronic kind of experiences over time that can, as you mentioned, Donna, be triggering both to the child and to the parent, and how research can invite parents into a space that inadvertently can be re-traumatizing. So an awareness of that's really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
This is Angela from the Family Support Institute. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Angela. Hi.
Hi, Angela.
It's actually, I guess, a slight question, but also a comment about participation. As you know, we support thousands of families, and I guess it's a bit about ethics when you talk about families maybe having a bit of fear or resistance to participation. One of the things that we've heard is that families often resist participation because they don't always understand the language that's being used about research. It's maybe not always plain language enough for them. And so when they see research studies come by, it's often just in a really complex language. And so that would be one suggestion, is maybe having organizations or some people kind of vet, and I know, Donna, you're really good at this, and Lucy, probably you really are as well, just making sure that there's some communication going out that's just really, really plain language, so that families know why this is relevant to them. But also, when you were talking about the example of the divorce and separation example that you had used, this is kind of my ethics question. Is it ethical, or do you have to go through some sort of process to talk about organizations that you might be able to partner with or share your results with, that could possibly lend some hope to families about what could potentially the results be used for afterwards? Because we know that families are always so generous with their vulnerable stories. And so they will often kind of lend their stories for a purpose, usually for the kind of purpose of supporting other families, but also, what's in it for me? And in this study, I think there's a whole lot in it for them. But if we could also share with them, the purpose of this study could lead to some potential even activism or advocacy to benefit the country as a whole, or even in our case, the province as a whole, to benefit services and supports through an advocacy lens. So, what this research told us is, and we have partners that are going to use this in this way. And I don't know if ethics-wise, your research, you can speak to that, but we certainly could. And I know there's lots of other partners that could do that as well. And that could generate some hope and inspiration for families to leverage their participation as well.
Love your comments, Angela. Those are extremely insightful. I think, it's the first of all, just the issue around plain language. Our consent forms and our, flyers and so on are vetted by the research ethics boards, and there are also programs online that will say, this is at a grade 10 level language, it should be at a grade 6 level or grade 5 level. So we are cognizant of that, but there's nothing better than having parents read the consent forms and say to us, you know what, this is just still too jargony, I don't get it, it's too much. I guess one of the other issues that has come up for us is the ethics forms increasingly are getting longer and longer. It's because in there, the idea of what the benefits of the project could be and how the findings could be used are usually embedded in the consent forms, if you can imagine. But the consent forms end up being so long that I don't even know whether parents see it in there, quite frankly. So that's a second issue. And then the third piece around, the catalytic quality of, how can findings be used for the purpose of advocacy? There's nothing better than having the groups working with you at the front end who can benefit from the work that you're doing, who are, as I said, at the finish line with you saying, okay, we can take this up now and we'll run with it. Because there's nothing more gratifying for a researcher to know that their findings are being taken up in that manner.
Right. Great.
And
thanks.
that's why at Child Bright conferences, there's, I think it's every year now, there is a partnership, component. People are, researchers are, and I know that Kids Brain Health does this too, helps researchers identify partners early on, and so that there can be knowledge translation and implementation of those projects right away out of the finishing gate. As Lucy said, partners are all lined up at first.
Right. So on that note, thank you, Angela. I know that we've gone well over now, so I'm turning it over to Pierre to kind of close it up. Pierre.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again for staying late and having that really great discussion with us all. It certainly has been quite illuminating. And I guess just two quick notes to make to the group is that we will be connecting with you all either later today or by tomorrow with the link to this presentation along with the presentation slide deck. And we ask that in the note we send out, we'll be sending a feedback form along as well, and it'd be great to get some of your feedback on potential future sessions we can hold. At least that way we are more responsive to the training needs of the community as a whole. So if you can just take a minute or two to fill out the survey and get back to us, that'll be greatly appreciated. Alternatively, you can just connect with me through the contact details here and relay any sort of comments or feedback to me as you wish. And just as a reminder note, we have still 2 wonderful sessions remaining in this series later on in the summer. So if you haven't registered yet, please feel free to check out Child Bright's event page and sign up. It'd be great to have you again. So again, Donna, Lucy, thank you so much for presenting your wealth of knowledge to us all today, and for everyone else on the line for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Peter.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.